the Strait of Hormuz is still closed. Trump is not tackling, unfortunately, and that's having huge ramifications on the global economy. China is still powering through. How does everything look to you, Warwick?
Well, sometimes the more things change, the more they seem to stay the same, don't they? The situation in Hormuz, in some respects, of course, Trump has tacoed in that he has been distinctly unwilling to re-engage in the level of kinetic conflict that the United States was party to, and in fact instigated on the 28th of February. In fact, I think it's fair to say that Donald Trump has persistently looked for ways to not seriously re-engage at a military level, and I think he intuitively understands that doing so would be piling on disaster upon disaster. Of course, keeping the American Navy in at the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz is a way of firstly preserving some reputation, and no doubt it does have some effects in terms of being able to intercede some ships that try to sneak on through. But I think that there are plenty of reports which shows that there are tankers and other kinds of vessels making their way through, firstly having secured safe passage from the Iranian authorities, and then eventually being able to navigate their way through the American blockade. And some of that, it will be oil, of course, and some of that is things like fertilizers. It looks like that there are some fertilizers getting through, but none of that is of a volume that is going to somehow arrest the shrinking stocks of energy and fertilizers that are available in the global economy at the moment. And as reserves around the world continue to be consumed, we are still on track for, I think, a pretty serious reckoning with molecular reality. Right? It's one thing for paper markets to be manipulated and jawboned, but it's a different thing when at some point people turn on the tap and there simply isn't the flows that they expected. So in that sense, I think we are on track for some very, very tough times and some hard landings, which will be uneven across the world. Yeah, look, the other thing that I think is going to happen over time and is people often think of these wars as events, right, with a beginning and an end. And we know that the wars that have, that are currently active, didn't just have a simple starting point. They've got long histories, there've been previous episodes, there've been sustained resource mobilization, preparations, agitations, destabilizations, and whatnot. But and because of that, there's also no sort of endpoint either. It's not like it's not like the unconditional surrender moments that we often have in our mind, where the white flag goes up and documents are signed and all that sort of stuff, and people meekly go away. Especially when it's the empire that's on the wrong end of the stick here. And there's every likelihood, I think, that these wars will transition to a qualitatively different phase, where the United States will engage in a lot more, I guess, what you'd call dirty warring, as well as their allies, of course. And the one thing I'll always say to people is, whilst conventional military constraints are clearly holding the United States back these days, we've seen all the data on all the missiles they've used up and the problems of replenishing them and all of that. All of that's true, right? And when you're sitting there in the Pentagon, or you're sitting there in the State Department or in the White House, and you're confronted with these realities, well, you don't change your ends. That's something that empires find very difficult to do, because that destroys the identity of the empire. But you will change your means. And, you look at the resources that you do have at your disposal, and the one great resource that the United States has, far more extensive than any other country in the world, is its intelligence network across the world. You know, the three-lettered agencies and their so-called civil society collaborators, you know, NGOs and the rest, right across the world, it's extensive, and they are past masters at, you know, orchestrating all sorts of you know, not quite wars. Right? This is what they do. So I have a really bad suspicion that that over the next 2 to 3 years, as the situation in Ukraine, you know, really becomes quite evident, that the war on the ground, the official war, if you will, is literally heading up that cul-de-sac, the primrose path that John Mearsheimer talked about. Then the Americans and the Europeans will shift qualitatively to a dirty war mode. We're already seeing some of that now, you know, whether it's piracy, you know, attack on civilian buildings, a bit of terror, you know, nothing like terror. You know, I mean, assassinations. Yeah, you know, so we're in for a long haul, I think, of very destabilized world, even if on the surface of things, you know, go back to our original discussion about the taco question. Well, yeah, there's sort of there's a bit of a taco on the conventional kinetic warfare, but there's certainly no taco on the unconventional quasi-kinetic, non-kinetic warfare. So.
Okay, I like to switch the topic to China for a second. You know, so far it seems like China has been holding up pretty well. 3 months into the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, China still have the world's largest strategic oil reserve. I think one reason, you know, the panic hasn't been as much widespread yet in the world is there has been a drawdown of the strategic petroleum reserve all around the world that has kind of cushioned the blow. But interestingly, China had barely drawn down its own oil inventory. It still set around like 1.4 billion barrels of oil, and it's larger than US, Japan, and Europe combined. Now, I actually saw somebody trying to spin this. I saw a Chinese dissident posting on X. He posted a video of Chinese state media covering the Chinese premier Li Qiang visiting Ningbo to inspect the local grain reserve and the oil reserve. It's just a standard news, but except the Chinese dissident is saying, oh, during the surprise inspection tour, it was revealed that, you know, China actually didn't have those oil reserves. It's all filled with water. I mean, this is the same story they try to say, you know, Chinese ballistic missile is all filled with water instead of fuel. And then that story I saw, it got picked up by some other anti-China channels as a talking point. And like, there's literally no source for the claim. You know, they have a video which is all in Chinese, so people don't know what they're talking about. And like, there's a video just saying the Chinese premier Li Qiang visited local grain reserve to inspect local grain reserve in Ningbo and the local oil reserve. But the claim that originated with the Chinese dissident network is being picked up by all these other Chinese, anti-China talk shops and say, oh, see, China, all the data is fake. They actually don't have the oil reserve they claim they do. I think the reason for that is it's spin, it's copium, just to make people think, oh, China have it as bad as us. And I that's the only utility I could think of, because right now
it makes them feel good, Carl. It makes them feel good. There's you know, 3 generations of dissidents who have been, you know, in one way or another predicting the demise of the People's Republic of China. They've cultivated a cohort of, Cold War warriors around them from the West, who, of course, are champing at the bit for the fall of the last communist domino, and none of it's come true. But they've got to sustain this. It makes them feel good. It gives them comfort. And there was a time, I think, where I perhaps would have, reeled at the prospects that these people make so much nonsense up. But I'm actually far more comfortable with the fact that, them making up this nonsense just helps them get out of bed each day and helps them get by each day. And if that is helpful for them as a form of therapy, group therapy and individual therapy, then, I'm modestly supportive of it, because reality just moves on anyway. And the reality is that, as you say, China, based on available and known data, has barely touched its known reserves. Perhaps it's got other reserves that it has been touching. Well, and if it does, then they weren't known by the West anyway. Point number one. But secondly, and I think we've gone through this in some detail previously, but essentially, China's economic structure has enabled it to substitute where it can. So the coal to liquid projects, of course, have cranked up. When prices hit about $70 a barrel, those coal to liquid projects became viable, and that's information that I've gotten from talking with colleagues of mine in China who are in the coals to liquids game. They basically said to me, look, once it's hit $70 and it stayed there for a couple of weeks, we were ready to go. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that Russia has been able to offset substantially the decline in the oil flows out of the Middle East. So that's the second thing. And we know that this has been happening, by the way, because data shows now that for the first 5 months of this year, Russian oil exports, compared to the same period last year, have been greater in volume and financial terms. Right? So Russia's export capacity has actually increased in 2026 compared to 2025, and that's despite the fact that there've been, some well-publicized drone attacks on Russian refineries and oil storage facilities, etc. It's basically had negligible effect on overall oil exports. So that's the second thing. And thirdly, of course, at a macro level, the Chinese economic structure is far less oil dependent than it once was, and people just need to remember that. If this problem emerged 30 years ago, there'd be some real strife. But 2026 isn't 1996. So China, I think for many different reasons has been very, very well prepared, and maybe the dissidents just don't like that. They just hate the idea that China got well prepared despite all of their own, prejudices and prognostications. It does look, China in an odd kind of way, indirectly, being so well prepared, has contributed to oil prices not going through the roof at this point in time. Put aside the manipulation that happens every Friday and every Monday. The fact that China has been buying less from the global market anyway has taken some pressure out of the market, and China is actually sufficiently confident in its liquid fuels situation that it has, reinstigated exports of jet fuel and diesel and things to other countries, including, incidentally, I might add, the Philippines. When the Philippines, by the way, has experienced 50-60% increase in the cost of these fuels in the course of the last 3 months. It's 98% dependent on imported fuels from memory, give or take. Maybe my memory's a little bit off, but it basically relies entirely on imported refined petroleum products, and China helped out. The other one that's probably worth noting is, aside from oil and energy, is the fertilizer stuff, and Fertilizers, China is actually a net exporter of fertilizers. It makes most of its fertilizers using coal, not gas. And in fact, between China and Russia, these two countries manufacture over 50% of the world's fertilizers. So, China's okay on fertilizer front. Many other countries aren't. Petrochemicals, China's by and large okay as well. I mean, if there's a country in the region that's really under the pump when it comes to petrochemicals, it's Japan, right? Heavily dependent on naphtha. It's already having to buy naphtha from Chinese suppliers to compensate for the naphtha that it's not getting elsewhere. So yeah, look, for the time being, China is reasonably well positioned relative to other places. The last thing to note on all of this, by the way, and I think you've probably seen quite a bit of this as well. A lot of mainstream Western commentary will say that China's got a desperate need to have the Strait of Hormuz reopened because the downward pressure on the global economy will reduce global demand for Chinese exports, right? And you hear this from commentaries from the Asia Society and through to the who's who of Western mainstream commentary. Well, if that was the case, it would be impossible to explain the growth in Chinese exports between January and April. So the evidence does not support the mainstream theoretical construct, and
Chinese EV export is skyrocketing right now.
Yeah,
all across the world.
Not just EVs, right? I mean, industrial machinery, solar PVs, of course, wind turbines, you name it, anything high tech, Chinese microprocessors, electronics, they've all been going gangbusters. And, in part because countries are actually wanting this stuff so as not to have these kinds of risks in the future.
Yeah.
So.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to cover today?
Well, look, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? We catch up every couple of weeks thinking that maybe we'll have a quiet fortnight and we can talk about surfing or fishing or something, right? But the world conspires continually to be disruptive. And I mean, the only thing that I guess say to people at the moment is that we've got to be mindful as the sort of dominant architecture and the strength of the United States continues to erode, that it doesn't necessarily mean that somehow we pop out the other end at a utopia. We don't. In fact, in some ways, a multipolar world is a more difficult world, a more fluid world, but it's a world in which countries and communities and people are willing to embrace, even though it is more challenging. It's easy when you've got, the big hegemon dictating how the show goes, right? It's much harder when you've got to put the time and effort into negotiating with others, into trying to find compromises when you've got interwoven interests. That's hard work. And I think when we think about a multipolar world unfolding, we always have to be mindful that that world will actually be a world that involves much more hard work, much more statecraft, actually a lot more tensions that need to be addressed than a world in which there is a dominant hegemon. And against all of that, of course, is the dominant hegemon intensifying its dirty wars.
Yeah, well said. Thank you again, Dr. Powell, for making your time to speak to us. If people want to follow your work, where would they go?
The little advertising moment at the back end. Warwickpowell.substack.com. And people are always, of course, encouraged to check out my book, Thermoeconomics in a Time of Monsters, which is available on Amazon.